Okay, so so we talked about how do we minimize interference. Well, one of the ways is we put a lot of space between them, but and we're not. Let me see if this works. Okay, uh, but how do we get that space? And we talked about physical separation. Well, one way is we can use very long RF cables. Uh, we can put our radios next to the people and our antennas 3, 4, 500 feet away. Uh, these long cables are expensive. That's the real major thing. They do have a little bit of loss, but as an old friend who's now a silent key, Gene W3ZZ, used to say, okay, so what that you have an extra dB of loss? The DX will never know. And when you think about it, 1 dB is not a lot in the grand scheme of things. So this is one way we can run a long cable, or we move the radio further away. But regardless, we've got a few things and there we go, we've got to deal with. If we're going to put this radio 500 feet away, and we're not going to run a long cable, we're going to IP connect Ethernet. We've got to have a way to log. We've got to have a way to generate FTA, generate CW, or pass our sideband voice over. We generally have those worked out of computers at the remote. We've got that, FT8 interfaces, WinKeys. That's there. But we use directional antennas, so we got to have a way to turn them. We have multiple antennas, so we got to have a way to switch them. I don't want to walk 500 feet through those rocks that we were talking about and twist an ankle every time I want to change bands. And you have to make sure everything runs on 12 volts. And maybe even we have a little bit of monitoring or metering to know what we're doing. So one of the thoughts here is, as we move our radios, if we're going to keep all the radios, for example, at field day in the comm trailer, and they're just going to be stacked down the table, we don't need, we're going to use the local control panel on the radio. We're just talking to an antenna that's a long way away. But if we're going to move the radio out there because we don't have 500-foot coax cables or hard lines, a good human interface, a quality human interface, is a must. On the picture on the lower right is ICOM's software. We own a copy of this that we could talk to one of the IC7300 spooge masters. But when we put that thing 500 feet away, it's not as big a spooge master as it used to be. But that's really difficult that's a great interface if you're running digital, because you pretty much set your radio and you set it, and you forget it. But if you're running sideband or CW, constantly going up and down the band, looking for things, tuning people in, that's a really awkward interface. It'll work, but you're not going to make lots of contacts. So you probably want to get what's in the just to the left of it and down, one of these VFOs and function buttons, and then you can at least tune around the band a little easier. But my favorite is if you have a K4, and we don't have a lot of those, you can remote into a K4 with another K4, and you're completely remoted. Your radio, your digital section is talking to a RF radio frequency section somewhere else, and you don't even know it. They do this typically at Dayton. They'll have a K4 on the bench and they say, this isn't hooked to an antenna, it's hooked to a dummy load. I'm talking to my K4 out in California at Elecraft headquarters, and that's how they're making all the contacts. The other is in the upper right, they do make a thing called a K30, which is just the digital section, and it connects to a full K3 somewhere else. I have one of these, and I just need to get it interfaced to my K3, but this is a much nicer way to remote. And there we go. So, and we'll tie all this together, and I'm going to try to be a little bit quick because I peeked at Mark's slides that's coming up after me, and he has a real nice presentation, and I want to give him plenty of time. So, the remote antenna switches, I recently have been looking for a good antenna switch. Do I build or do I buy? Well, I found this unit out of Australia. Out of Victor Kilo, and it's a real nice switch. It's 4 ports, as you can see on the left middle picture, the SO239 connectors, and a common and 4 outputs. They used the nice big higher current Omron relays, which all RF relays are not built equally. There's a lot that look like this, but I was chatting with Steve Castro from Down East Microwave one day, and he goes, "Yeah, that one's got the cheese ball relay. There are some relays out there that are cheese balls. You just don't want them. These are nice relays, and I've now ordered. I have 3 of these bare boards. One for the QRV2, QRV3, and QRV4. But we got to put them in a box, and we've got to come up with a controller. I liked these enough that I bought one for my home station. It's over on the right. You can see the same board, but mounted in a box. And he actually makes a control box that has a select switch. You push the button and it cycles through the 4 antennas. And pay attention to there's a PTT in and a PTT out. Why am I sending a PTT to an antenna switch? Well, you don't want to hot switch the relays. If you're transmitting it 1 to 200 watts, and I think he technically says these can take legal limit. I don't know that I'd want to run legal limit through this a lot, but for our field day and field use, they'll be great. But we can put a signal into this from the HF radio, and then we can come out of this and go to any amplifier you may have or other things that you want to say, hey, I'm transmitting, don't change the state of these relays. That's a very useful feature. So, but there's no remote control. So if this is in a van that's 500 feet away at field day, I got to walk out there to push the button. I probably could build a processor that takes Ethernet and things, but my hope is in presenting this to my fellow nerds, if someone is interested in making a control board that has an Ethernet connection and maybe a local button for some control, I would love to team up and put my RF chocolate with your control peanut butter, and we make a Reese's cup. So,
So,
and you're
Doug,
probably, yeah, Willem.
it has an Ethernet port on it, but does it actually
Yeah,
talk IP, or is
no,
it
no,
just
no.
using?
That's where I was gonna go. These are not an Ethernet port. This is simply an 8-wire control, positive and ground for 4 relays. That RJ45 is not Ethernet. You're talking about this one and this one, Willem, I believe. Come on, give me the big arrow. But you see the ports. That's what you're talking about, right?
Yeah, but
And
I
the
mean,
length?
it's Ethernet, right? The Ethernet plug
No,
fit right in there.
it's not Ethernet. It's plus 12 and ground on pin 1 is ground, pin 2 is plus 12 for relay 1. Pin 3 is ground, pin 4 is plus 12 for relay 2.
Oh, so it's not even a BCD coded input.
No.
Oh,
They just used a shielded ether, which is probably a decent cable, but you can easily get confused and try to put Ethernet through this thing. And heaven forbid, if you put PoE 48 volt into a 12 volt relay, you're probably going to smoke it. So we just have to be careful with that. But the controller, the only control is this push button. So just something to think about if somebody is really up on, everybody uses Raspberry Pis these days, but I think that's overkill. Is this an application for an Arduino or one of those small single chip controllers? Maybe. But think about it. But we also need to integrate in turning this antenna. We could build a interface to our traditional ham4 rotators, or we have a couple of these green herons, but they don't generally directly talk Ethernet. But we can talk to them through the local computers if needed. And James Sizek has pointed out to us these Arcos, and I think John has one of these on the lower right. And this is a very nice rotator controller. It is over 800 bucks, but that's not that bad when you consider you've got a display and I guess I said LCD, but that's really not LCD. Well, maybe it is, but it tells you where your antenna's pointed, and you've got presets. And this just has an Ether connection on the back. This is what we were using for Winter Field Day for the QRV2, because we were operating from the van that was 500, or the comm trailer that was 500 feet away. So to not harp, so I think this is my last slide. So here's the bottom line of where I'm going with all of this. I have the old field day layout on the screen here, but if we were to redo our layout and place our stations across essentially a north-south line, oops, you can't use this magic mouse. We could place all of our antennas such that they're side-to-side isolation, but we're either going to need some long cables to get there or remote operation. And it's conceivable we could place our Yagi that's tuned for the CW band down, maybe we put it down where the Station 4 remote is, and run with one of these duplexers, triplexers. We run 40, 20, 15, and 10 in the low end of the band, and we give the FT8 station a tap, and we take a tap for CW. We could run sideband and some other things on 2 bands down at where I've got Station 3 remote. We still have local stations. So this is something to think about, and I'm seeing stuff come up in the chat window, but maybe you guys, if we do, Doug, I emailed you a jar of peanut butter. Okay. And Tristan says, what happens if you activate multiple of the relay inputs? So, okay, I'll get to that one. But so this is the concept. We should relay our field day station from not being an east-west with the station, so we're firing into each other and getting tons of friendly fire, to more layout on a north-south path, and see about getting some of these stations remotely operable so we truly can put some of the stations at 2 Spinelli distance, 500 to 600 feet. And when we upgrade to cleaner radios, we'll get a little better. So Tristan writes in the questions, what happens if you activate multiple of the relay inputs? Any protection against that? Great question. If we do operate multiple relays, we're basically going to change the impedance of the antennas, because I now have 2 50 ohm antennas in parallel. But if I've accounted for that, in my cabling, that would be a valid condition. But if the antennas are not, then what we would want to do is put protection in the controller to say you can't select antenna 1 and antenna 2 at the same time. Put that in the software in the control module. But maybe we have phasing lines to multiple slopers or something, and we do that, perhaps a nice feature creep complication, as long as it doesn't get too complicated. When it's too complicated, Scott Burkhart would say, it's not going to work. So maybe we allow that, but it's all up to the controller and the relays. So, and Ed sent me some peanut butter, and I still have a few minutes left, but I think that's my last slide. Any questions or comments or, yeah, there we go. Thoughts?
Doug, any experience with the Flex radios, running them remotely?
Flex radios do run beautifully remotely. They just are not quite as high on the Rob Sherwood list, and they need a little bit more isolation, but they will work very well because you have it. The interface you have will be there whether the radio is remote or local. So, but we ran them up at the 100th anniversary of WWV when we were operating as WW0WWV, and the Flexes had a little more trouble with all of the HF amateur radios we had and the 5 and 10 kilowatt WWV transmitters. The Elecrafts just sailed through that.
Hey, Doug.
I heard a hey Doug. Who that?
This is Jerry. I'm remoting
Jerry.
my Flex. Yeah, I'm remoting my Flex from my home to it's about 130 miles east out at Simla. And of course, there's no 100,000 watt transmitter out there, but it works very, very well. And I operate it with a Maestro, and I've got my iPad here, and I can do it on the iPad. I normally just use that
That's nice.
to monitor, but it works real well.
Neat. Yeah, that's what we need to do if we're going to run a bunch of stations at field day, or if you're doing a multi contest, you're going to want to by the contest rules or field day rules, you got to have everything within 1,000 feet. But at Rocky Mountain Ham, we've tended in the screen is doing some weird stuff. Is that me or? Okay. So I don't think I'm sharing anymore, so I'm assuming that's on your end. But we operate everything within 100 feet typically. Let's use the 1,000-foot radius. So if any of my fellow nerds are out there, I challenge you to place some white tape on the bridge of your glasses and nerd out with us and build some equipment. We've got really great things. Let's see if we can push it to our field day. And then once we get this stuff working really well, let's do what Jerry did and make this equipment available year round so that people can dial into it and our club equipment and get on the air. So any other questions?